I originally had a totally separate masterclass planned for today, and I deleted all of it because there was a question that a student asked that triggered all of these thoughts, and it was really a revelation for myself. And some of the things, as I was answering this person's question, I realized I was doing these things, but taking it for granted that I was doing them, and not really sharing them or teaching them to others because it was just something that I do, but had actually forgotten that, hey, I should be telling all of you this stuff. Okay, because it's not at all common to how guitar is generally taught, or in fact how many things are usually taught. Okay, and the question was basically something like this. The student asked me, Tom, what do you think about when you're playing guitar, or when you're writing songs, or when you're improvising? What is the thought that's going on? What's going on here? And I think what the student wanted to know was, am I thinking about keys or scales or what notes, or, and I think the student probably wanted to take whatever it was that I said and then also start thinking about those same things to model after whatever I was doing. He perhaps thought he was going to do the same thing, and that would be good for him. And what I said to him is, what I think about when I'm playing and what you might think about when you play might be totally different, and maybe should be totally different because we're at different skill levels, we have different, musical goals, we're doing different things, we have different skill sets, all these things. When we are beginners, we have all kinds of stuff that we have to think about and focus on mentally while we're playing or creating something that an intermediate player doesn't have to think about. And an advanced player doesn't have to think about the same things that intermediate players do, etc. And the more advanced you become, at least in theory, there could be or should be less things, or at least less basic things that you have to think about, right? I mean, none of you in this room still think about how to hold the pick, what finger you're going to use for a scale. I mean, you guys are past all of that. You've been past that for years. Okay, you're at a much, much higher level. But you're still being burdened with all this conscious thought that's going on. All right? So you're not thinking, about all that simple stuff that you did when you started out. You've grown from there. Each time we can remove a layer of things that we actively have to think about while we play or while we create, we become more free. We become able to do things on a more advanced level, and we can use the skills that we have while improvising, while songwriting, or just while playing guitar in general. At this point in my playing, for what I personally want to do or need to do, I'm pretty free. That doesn't mean that there is no time that I don't have to think about anything, but for the majority of playing situations that I would choose to be in, I have a lot of freedom. And I didn't quite realize that until this student asked me this question. Even though it's been true for many years, it really brought to my forefront of my mind as I was answering this question that I don't think about any of the stuff that I know that this student is going to be thinking about. I don't think about what the key is. I don't think about what the chord progression is. I don't think about what chord is coming next. I don't think about what notes are in those chords. I don't think about where those notes are on the guitar. I don't think about when the next chord is coming. I don't think about where to start my phrase, where to end my phrase. I don't think about pitch range. I don't think about any of those things anymore. Because those skills or those thoughts are on autopilot for me. Because I've removed all of that stuff from my thought process so that I can freely just play whatever it is I want to play. So my answer to the student was, I'm thinking more about emotions, more specifically about what is the exact emotion in this phrase or in this note that I want to have happen here. And I realized that the only way I got to that point was by specifically asking myself this question. What am I thinking about right now? And this is how I used to practice. I mean, this is one of the ways I used to practice. I didn't do only this. But when working on trying to become free, I would improvise or create something, and I would ask myself, I might play a measure of something, and I would stop. And I would ask myself, what am I thinking about? Whatever the answer was, that told me exactly that this is what I need to practice. So if I was thinking about, well, there's a D chord being played, and I need to know where those notes in that D chord are on the guitar so I can start or end a phrase or, play around those notes, that told me immediately, this is what I need to work on. I need to understand what notes are on what chords. That was step one. I then needed to understand where those notes are on the guitar and be able to recall them. After that, I needed to be able to understand how does each one of those notes feel, because the root of a D chord feels differently than the third feels on a D chord. And not only is it about a D chord, but it depends upon where that D chord is within the key. If we're in the key of D, the F sharp note, which happens to be the third of a D chord, sounds totally different than if we're in G, the key of G, which has a D chord. Okay? So not only was it about the D chord and the notes of the D chord, but also how each one of those notes feels, and it changes. The feeling of each note within the chord changes depending upon what key we're in, because the function of that chord changes as we go from one key to another key, even if those keys still have a D chord in it. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's more and more thoughts to this whole process that I would go through, but I would always ask myself, what am I thinking about now? And I would write it down, and that's exactly what we're going to do in a few minutes. I'm going to ask two of you to come up here, and we're going to go through that process. I'm going to ask you, what are you thinking about now? And whatever comes out of your mouth, that's what you got to work on. Now you know exactly what needs to happen to get yourself from being here to becoming more free. Because the first thought that comes in your mind, the first thing that you're thinking about is the first thing we have to remove. Because even though there are other things you need to think about, your brain doesn't even have time to deal with those because it's being burdened with this more immediate problem, this more immediate thought. Okay? So do you see how this is going to drive, however you answer this question for yourself, is going to dictate and determine exactly what needs to happen next. So you know, I need to understand where I am on the guitar. I need to memorize this scale pattern. If you're still thinking about what scale am I in, what does that fingering look like, how do I visualize this? If that's what you're struggling with, you know that you need to memorize your scales or scale patterns or modes or fingerings better. Okay? If you're thinking about, okay, there's a chord being played and let's see, I think I'm on beat 3, but I'm not sure when the next measure is coming. If that's what you're thinking about, knowing when the next chord happens, then you know you need to focus more on paying attention to what's happening in the background, and that might be more important for you than even thinking about what you're doing. Because if you can't keep track of that, how are you going to keep track of what you're doing if you're not even sure what's going on, with the band or with another guitar player who's playing chords for you or whatever? Okay? So this is going to determine for you the exact order in which things need to be done. For myself, at this point, I know that anytime I'm in a playing situation or a creative situation, if I am not thinking about emotion at any given point, I know I have a restriction. I know I have a burden. I have a limitation which needs to be removed. So in some situations, I might be playing under certain circumstances which are very much within my comfort zone, and I can play freely and not have to think about any of that technical stuff or music theory stuff or any of that sort of thing. I know what I'm going to do, I know what it's going to sound like before it happens, and I know how that's going to feel once those notes come out. If I think about anything else, I've identified a problem, and now I know I need to go back and practice that until it's eliminated. Once that happens, I come back to the music, and now I'm able to play free again until I discover, in some other playing situation, some other restriction or some other problem, some other burden. And now I know I have to go back, and that's what I need to focus on until it's gone.